As Israel intensifies its offensive in Gaza, the killing of aid workers and journalists has sparked outrage. But are Western governments looking away? Can there be justice and accountability?
If a journalist was killed on the streets here in London, it would be an outrage, and it should be no different at the international level, particularly because journalists reporting on conflicts are often the only source of independent information that we have.
With mounting evidence of war crimes and the UK continuing to supply arms to Israel, can the British government claim to stand for human rights? We ask a former British Justice Minister.
There can be no justification whatsoever for supporting Israel's genocide efforts, because it is a genocide. It's not a war. And in many ways, it's a sanctioned genocide.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. Gaza is witnessing a severe escalation in violence, with human rights under relentless assault as journalists and medical aid workers are being targeted and killed by Israeli forces. Among recent attacks, an Israeli airstrike targeted a media tent outside a hospital in Khan Yunis. A recent study has found that more journalists have been killed by Israel in Gaza since October 2023 than in the US Civil War, World Wars I and II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the wars in Yugoslavia, and the war in Afghanistan combined. Additionally, 15 medics and aid workers were killed by Israeli forces and buried in a mass grave north of the Gazan city of Rafah, according to the Palestine Red Crescent Society. The organization has called for an international investigation, labeling the attack a full-fledged war crime. More than 400 aid workers, including close to 300 UN staff, have been killed in Israeli attacks in Gaza since October 2023. That's according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. So today we ask, what does justice for Gaza look like? Can the courts deliver accountability? Joining me now is Rodney Dixon KC, an international lawyer and counsel in cases concerning attacks and the killing of journalists in Gaza and the West Bank, which have been submitted to the International Criminal Court. Rodney Dixon, you are currently representing several journalists who've come under attack by Israeli forces. Why is it so important for the courts to prosecute these cases, and how much progress has been made to date?
It's very important for the court to be investigating and bringing charges in these cases if there is sufficient evidence, and we say on the basis of the evidence we've gathered that there is, because these have been persons reporting from the field. Their colleagues continue to do so. And the more that they are under attack, the less news and information the world is able to get about what's actually happening.
But how likely, though, is it that there will ever be justice and accountability?
Well, we've seen charges already laid at the ICC in the first Gaza case. That was a breakthrough moment. Many people thought that wasn't ever going to be possible, but that has happened. That gives many people working in this area hope. There have also been, in other ICC situations, arrests of persons. Trials have gone on. That's happened at many international criminal courts before, Yugoslavia, Rwanda. So over time, the system works. It works slowly, but it does work.
But does it work? How many successful prosecutions have there been?
Well, the ICC has had a number, and so have other international courts. We mustn't only look at the ICC. It takes a lot longer. Often people have to leave office, or the political structure or relations have to change in a country, or people travel inadvertently. But there have been a number of trials, including of former heads of state, ministers of defense, foreign ministers, generals in armies, going right back to Nuremberg and beyond. It's a rich tradition, and it's only grown, and we must believe that it's going to continue in the right direction.
In your own experience as counsel, just how seriously are the courts, and more specifically the ICC, taking these attacks against journalists?
Well, the ICC has said publicly that they are looking at these cases. They're looking at a number of instances, obviously, and widespread attacks on civilians, not only in the Israel-Palestine conflict, but many other conflicts as well.
But is that enough?
Well, they have said that they are investigating these matters. It takes time to get all the evidence together. We have provided some of that, but the ICC has to do the investigations themselves. And what we are hoping is that now that the first charges have been laid, there can be additional charges added on, new cases brought in the future.
Given the severity of these attacks and the frequency with which they happen, are the courts doing enough? Specifically, is the ICC doing enough? Or are they under considerable political pressure not to?
Yes, the ICC is taking all steps within their mandate to investigate these cases. They can only do them as quickly as the evidence comes in and they're able to gather it. They can't go any faster than that. But they have come under a lot of pressure to stop investigations. We've seen the sanctions that have been imposed, a lot of the public statements that have been made. But they've made it very clear, from the judges all the way down to the prosecutors, the registry, that they're going to keep doing their job in accordance with their lawful mandate.
But is your sense that the process is being stalled?
They have made very clear, and we've seen no evidence of any holding back, that they're going to continue doing their work in this situation and in all situations across the globe. The sanctions that have been applied have been levied in particular because of the Israel-Palestine situation, but they affect the court as a whole. So not only do they potentially impede investigations there, but elsewhere as well, like in Ukraine. But the ICC is finding ways to keep going, to keep everything on track.
We know that in national jurisdictions, governments would never accept brazen attacks against journalists. Why are we seeing the selective application of international law?
You're absolutely right. If a journalist was killed on the streets here in London, there would be an outrage, and it should be no different at the international level, particularly because journalists reporting on conflicts are often the only source of independent information that we have. Parties often cover up to ensure that alleged crimes are not exposed. So that is why it is so important for the ICC to be, amongst all of the crimes against civilians as a whole, focusing on journalists.
The ICC has international jurisdiction, but it doesn't mean that other national bodies couldn't investigate these cases, does it?
Absolutely. Often we focus on the ICC as the only solution. When it has limited resources, it can only do a certain number of cases. And in fact, our national jurisdictions, including here in the UK, have wide powers under universal jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute cases wherever they are committed.
So a UK court could take up the case of a journalist killed in Gaza?
Absolutely, if it fitted within the UK legislation, which in certain circumstances covers war crimes and torture as well under the Criminal Justice Act. They could investigate it and prosecute it here, and it could be done at a much lower level, involving the direct perpetrators or those in charge. And we don't always have to be pointing the finger then at the ICC. National jurisdictions have that power. It's just not exercised enough across the board, not only in this situation, but in many other situations.
Why isn't it? What kind of link needs to exist between the victim and the court?
Well, for universal jurisdiction, there's no link required. As long as the alleged perpetrator touches down on UK soil, then the courts have jurisdiction and they can investigate wherever the crime was committed, irrespective of the nationality of the victim. There is also the other requirement that the Attorney General needs to give consent for that prosecution to go ahead. So there's a political component that has to be addressed as well.
What other recourse do Palestinians really have in this case?
Well, the ICC is an important body. Having just said that universal jurisdiction is a viable option as well, we mustn't overlook that at the international level, the ICC has significant clout. But looking at remedies in national jurisdictions should be pursued because many alleged perpetrators travel. It's an increasingly global world and market, people are moving around, and both in relation to imposing sanctions on people, but also investigating them, is a very important route to follow.
But what are the chances that it would deliver justice and accountability for Palestinians when, let's face it, it has never delivered justice against any Western-backed leader?
Well, it has brought charges in the Israel-Palestine situation. That is what has caused the backlash, the sanctions. So it has had an impact. If it was just a toothless body, why bother with the sanctions and all of the criticism?
But it's
so
the outcome that matters.
Yes, it has had, I think, a very important first initial impact. And now that that has occurred, it's not going to be possible for all to happen immediately. It is entirely feasible that further charges could be brought based on the evidence, and that persons could in the future be arrested. This has happened in many other situations, many other countries. There's no reason to believe that this is some kind of special situation where if they're out of power or they travel in the future, they couldn't be subject to the ICC's jurisdiction. We've just seen what's happened in the Philippines with the former president being handed over. No one ever believed that would happen. I don't think victims could believe their eyes when they saw that, but it did.
But again, it's selective justice, isn't it? It's easy for the leader of the Philippines to be brought to justice, yet we see how the leader of Israel, despite the arrest warrant by the ICC, is able to travel the world quite freely.
You're right. I mean, there is no international police force, so you have to rely on states. But there are a number of states, over 120, that are signed up to the ICC that are determined to cooperate with the ICC. And the Philippines, even though they're no longer signed up, nevertheless still cooperated. Events conspired that allowed that to happen. And that has certainly made victims there realize that their beliefs in this happening eventually have been borne out. And that would be my message, that you have to continue believing in the justice system to work. It has worked in so many situations, and in the end, it's very hard to outrun criminal justice.
How long do you expect the ICC to take to decide on some of the cases that you've submitted?
We've asked the Office of the Prosecutor to look at these matters and all of the evidence provided as rapidly as possible. We know that the ICC at the moment has a very full plate. There are so many matters that they are having to investigate. But we are hopeful that we will know soon and that we will be able to ensure that there is justice brought for those who have been attacked, those who have been killed.
How soon? Could it take weeks, months, years?
I'm not able to give an exact figure. We've asked for it as soon as possible. The ICC has moved relatively swiftly in a number of situations, and we're hoping the same will apply here.
Rodney Dixon KC, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
As justice continues to evade Gaza's victims, children, journalists, and medics, UK and international lawyers have filed a war crimes complaint against 10 British nationals who fought with the Israeli army. The 240-page report submitted on behalf of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights and the UK-based Public Interest Law Centre accuses the Britons of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, including extermination, displacement, and murder.
Evidence which we have provided in our submission today clearly links them to crimes, crime sites, Israeli military units, and specific actions.
Europe, including UK, US, is not complicit. They are partners. Gaza is the graveyard of international law, international humanitarian law, and the human rights.
Certain states have taken it upon themselves, and Israel isn't the only one, taken it upon themselves to act with impunity. They act with impunity on the basis that nothing's going to happen to them.
Shahid Malik is a former UK Minister of Justice. He joins me now. Shahid Malik, as a former UK Justice Minister, what is your reaction to the recent war crimes complaint that was filed by prominent British and international lawyers who are calling for a, quote, full and urgent investigation and for criminal prosecutions of British nationals who are accused of serving with the Israeli military and committing war crimes in Gaza.
Well, I actually welcome that move. I think it's really important that we send out, at the very least, a very powerful signal that nobody should believe that they are unaccountable.
Could we see arrest warrants for any of these British nationals? Is that even remotely feasible?
I think everything is on the table, to be frank. I mean, they've submitted as I understand it, a 240-page dossier. And because of social media, they've had access to a lot of evidence, which otherwise they might not have, because a lot of these IDFers, they're very keen to display on social media some of the war crimes and crimes against humanity that they've engaged in. So I think it's going to be extremely interesting, but it's definitely a shot across the bows for all those who feel that they can go to Gaza as IDF soldiers, they can engage in war crimes and crimes against humanity, then they can come back to the UK and live normal lives. I certainly hope that it does lead to the issuing of arrest warrants, but obviously that's something we've got to just wait and see. It's quite, in many ways, unprecedented.
The lawyers representing the case said, quote, "We're standing on the brink of the collapse of the rule of order because certain states have taken it upon themselves to act with impunity." Do you agree? And what can be done?
Well, without doubt. And the most frightening thing I've got to say is that this sense of impunity with respect to Israel is now turbocharged because of the ascent of one Donald Trump. And that's what's frightening, because now I think Israel believes that it is completely unaccountable. It can act with complete impunity. And in practical terms, it might well be right, because we also see that other states are taking positions which take them outside of the rule of law, take them outside the Rome Statute. Hungary, for example, which is now leaving the ICC. Belgium, who say that if Netanyahu arrived there, they wouldn't arrest him. And so I think it's incumbent on individuals to look at different mechanisms to try to bring people who engage in war crimes to account.
But it isn't just Donald Trump in the United States or a couple of European nations. Do you believe the United Kingdom is also complicit, not just by shielding Israel, but by continuing to provide arms to the Israeli military?
I think most people would think that there can be no justification whatsoever for supporting Israel's genocide efforts, because it is a genocide. It's not a war. And in many ways, it's a sanctioned genocide, because if you ignore war crimes and you ignore crimes against humanity, then effectively in the West, for sure, the leadership in much of the West is allowing this to happen, hasn't got the moral courage to challenge it. And so we're living in a frightening time, a time which I've never known anything like in my lifetime.
How do you hold the Israeli government accountable when it is being protected by powerful countries?
Well, I think you've got to find creative ways. I think an example of that is the case that that has been taken in the UK. I also think that the US, which was the kind of champion of human rights, democracy, and free speech, albeit many people around the world didn't believe it, because we talk values, but we act with vested interest at every opportunity, including the democracy in Palestine in 2006, which, I mean, I was there as a monitor. It was one of the best democratic processes I'd ever seen. But we in the West decided we didn't want that democracy because we didn't like the outcome. So I think there's question marks about our values because we seem to act with vested interest.
Are you surprised at the erosion of these values?
I'm extremely surprised. I mean, I have to say that in the government in which I served in 2009, when we had an assault on Gaza, Gordon Brown, the then Prime Minister, did not hesitate. He called for an immediate ceasefire. And of course, after the 7th of October, neither the Prime Minister at the time in the UK nor the opposition leader, Keir Starmer, was able to call for a ceasefire. So I think we live in a very, very different world now. And it's a world where moral courage seems to have evaporated, and people are thinking about their own self-interest and not wanting to rock boats.
Why is that the case, though? Why do you believe the UK isn't using the kind of leverage it could?
Well, I think the reality is there's only one player in the world that has leverage over Israel. I mean, I recall discussing with former prime ministers when I was in government or in parliament why we were not being more outspoken on these obvious issues of outrage in the Middle East with respect to Israel committing atrocities. And the response I got was that, well, there's a strategy, which is that if we don't criticize now, that gives us more leverage when it comes to trying to push for peace. But we've got to learn that actually, whether we criticize or we don't, it makes no difference, because Israel does what it wants every single time. There's only one player in this world, and that's the USA.
But what about the other players, though? What about other Western governments like the United Kingdom? Surely they must have some influence.
Well, it's at the margins. Look, the US government, if I give the example of 1991, George Bush Sr., he was very unhappy at the settlement expansion under Yitzhak Shamir. And he threatened to cancel $10 billion of loan guarantees. And in fact, he delayed it for 121 days to prove that he would. That resulted in Israel halting its expansion plans, and actually in the Madrid peace talks in 1991, which were a precursor to the 1993 Oslo Accord. So Israel cannot survive without the USA, but sadly it can survive without the UK and practically every other country in the world. That's the real politique. Yes, we might think or portray ourselves as having influence. It's very much on the margins, and when it counts, it's zero.
You have been to Gaza about a dozen times. When you look at the humanitarian situation there today and the way Israel has blocked the delivery of food, medicine, and other vital supplies, how would you describe the situation? Because recently the Foreign Secretary said that it was a breach of international law, but his comments were quickly retracted by Downing Street.
That was very unfortunate. It's very uncommon to see people being brave on these issues in the Labour government. And actually what he said wasn't even brave. It was just common sense. And yet even that needed to be retracted. It just shows how we've regressed in our ability to challenge evil. And it is evil. What is going on in Gaza is evil. And about 10 heads of UN agencies said that it was an utter disregard for human life. And they were wrong, because the people that are perpetrating these acts against humanity don't view them as human. I mean, that's the whole point. Palestinians have been dehumanized, war crimes have been normalized, and it seems that genocide has been sanctioned by our leaders in the West. It's the most disgraceful time in the history of my life, for sure, and it needs people to stand up and speak out. And it's starting to happen. The impact, well, that's questionable.
And some people are standing up in the UK Parliament. In fact, some MPs have called for the British government to impose an arms embargo on Israel for halting the inflow of aid to Gaza. But is that wishful thinking?
I think it's very possible. It can easily be done. And to be honest, there is no excuse for not doing it. By not doing it effectively, we are complicit in the eyes of ordinary people. And I think they're right. I mean, We are complicit at this moment in time in the genocide that is taking place in the Gaza, and we ought never to be in that position.
What would
It's shameful.
What would justice and accountability for Gaza look like?
It sounds fanciful, but it needs a new world order. The current world order has collapsed. It is not fit for purpose. You can't have a world where just 5 permanent members decide what the UN does. It's got to be democratized, it's got to be reformed, and it can happen.
Shahid Malik, former UK Justice Minister, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
While there are growing calls for a complete overhaul of the existing international order, the reality remains the same. Western governments continue to arm the aggressor while preaching respect for human rights and the rule of law. Arab governments either look away or offer face-saving blueprints they have no intention or capability to implement. As Netanyahu and Trump continue to plan the next phase, perhaps even the next war, one thing is clear. The world is not just witnessing a failure of diplomacy and leadership, it is witnessing the collapse of morality and international law. That's all from me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team. Thanks for watching.